On June 2, 2023, India witnessed one of the deadliest and most devastating railway disasters. A triple collision involving two passenger trains and a freight convoy caused the deaths of 296 people and left more than 1,200 injured. The official investigations carried out by the Railway Safety Commission pointed to several failures at both the technical and human levels. However, in order to fully understand how this tragedy occurred, we have conducted a detailed reconstruction of the events and a thorough technical analysis to determine how the accident unfolded and what ultimately caused it. The events took place at Bahanaga Bazar station, a railway junction equipped with two main tracks, intended for the priority transit of long-distance passenger trains, and several auxiliary lines called loop lines, designed to divert slower rolling stock, or trains that must remain stationary without interfering with mainline traffic. The geometry of these auxiliary tracks includes tighter curve radii than the main lines, and turnouts controlled by switch machines under an electronic interlocking system, responsible for verifying the correct position of the rails and track occupancy before clearing the signals. At around 1900 hours local time, several trains were converging at this railway point. On one side, the 12841 Coromandel Express, operating between Shalimar and Chennai. On the other, the 12864 SMVT Bengaluru-Howrah Superfast Express, traveling in the opposite direction. And finally, a freight train loaded with iron or that remained stationary on one of the loop lines. The configuration and proximity of the tracks created a scenario in which any improper diversion could have critical consequences due to the density of traffic and the difference in mass between the trains. The Coromandel Express was traveling at approximately 79.5 miles per hour within the authorized parameters for that section, and was scheduled to pass through the station without stopping, remaining on the main track. The signaling displayed a green aspect, indicating a clear route and authorization to proceed without restrictions. At the same time, the Bengaluru-Howrah Superfast Express was advancing along the opposite main track at about 78.3 miles per hour, also with no scheduled stop at Bahanaga Bazar station. The sequence of events began when the Coromandel Express, despite having the green signal to proceed, was routed onto the loop line occupied by the freight train. This proved to be a critical point, as the electronic interlocking system was supposed to prevent an itinerary from being set if the destination track was occupied, and it also had to verify the correct position of the points before releasing the signal. However, on this occasion, the route taken by the train did not match the operational configuration associated with the signal. At that moment, the Coromandel Express entered the diversion onto the secondary track at high speed, encountering the tail of the freight convoy. The locomotive collided frontolaterally at an oblique angle relative to the longitudinal axis of the wagons. This contact simultaneously generated longitudinal compression and lateral transfer of energy. The immense structural resistance and the difference in mass of the stationary train caused the leading coaches of the Coromandel to begin derailing from the moment of impact, increasing the likelihood of rotation and displacement of the following vehicles. The Coromandel's locomotive partially lifted upon encountering superior structural resistance, while the leading coaches began to compress, suffering longitudinal intrusion due to structural collapse. The transmission of forces through the couplings generated successive deformations toward the rear of the train. In total, around 21 coaches of the Coromandel Express derailed, some stacked or overturned, others crossed relative to the track, creating a lateral dispersion pattern that invaded the adjacent main line. At that precise instant, the Bengaluru-Howrah Superfast Express was passing through the station in the opposite direction. Most of its coaches had already cleared the sector, but the last coaches had not yet completed the crossing. The Coromandel's derailed vehicles, projected laterally, entered the path of these coaches, producing a lateral and oblique collision. The interaction between the trains was not frontal but conditioned by the loss of alignment and the transverse position of the derailed coaches. As a result, several coaches of the Bengaluru-Howrah also derailed and suffered significant structural damage. Regarding the loss of human life, the figures were truly devastating. Subsequent official analyses and detailed technical reports indicated that 296 people had died, and that more than 1,200 were injured. The material damage to the trains was concentrated in the leading coaches of the Coromandel and in the last vehicles of the Bengaluru Howrah, consistent with the phases of impact and the lateral projection of the wagons. The railway infrastructure also suffered extensive and severe damage, as the rails were significantly deformed, the sleepers were displaced, and the signaling systems were likewise seriously affected by the derailment and the collision of the wagons. With regard to the causes that led to the collision of both trains, the official investigations identified several specific and well-documented findings. First, while a level crossing barrier was being repaired, incorrect connections were made in the automated signaling system, significantly altering its configuration and overall operation. In addition, the local personnel in charge of the control room did not have a standard circuit diagram and failed to follow established operational procedures, which prevented the anomaly from being detected with sufficient advance time before the accident. On the other hand, similar faults had previously been reported in February 2023 in the Southwestern Railway Zone, which unfortunately were not properly addressed or fully investigated by the authorities. Finally, the investigation clearly identified serious lapses at multiple levels within the signaling and telecommunications department, revealing significant supervisory failures that ultimately allowed a train running at full line speed to be diverted onto an already occupied track. From a dynamic perspective, this terrible accident can be broken down into three main phases. The first was the failure in the electronic guidance system, which diverted the Coromandel onto a secondary track. The second was the frontolateral impact with the rear section of the heavy freight train, which was stationary on that very same line. While the third was the lateral dispersion and secondary collision that occurred with the Bengaluru Howrah, which was traveling in the opposite direction. The combination of high speed, momentum, and differences in mass turned the situation into a chain of events that unfolded extremely rapidly, where every single second directly influenced the severity of the consequences. On the other hand, the absence of effective protocols, the ignored precedents, and the supervisory failures were the main causes that led to one of the most serious railway tragedies ever recorded in the history of India. And with this, we bring this video to an end. If you enjoy this type of content, you could subscribe and leave a like, as thanks to your support I can continue creating these technical analyses. And if you subscribe, you will also be able to stay informed about all the new content we upload to the channel. Finally, before signing off, I would like to know your opinion in the comments, and find out whether you believe this tragedy could have been prevented. Thank you all very much for watching. I will read you in the comments, and see you in the next video.